They said she was too dumb for school, but they never heard her speak. Not really. Not like this. The air in the school auditorium was thick with the scent of old velvet curtains, floor polish, and the collective breath of hundreds of parents and restless children. I sat on one of the creaky, unyielding seats, a paper program clenched so tightly in my hand that the edges were softened and damp. My own hands were trembling, a mirror to the ones I imagined were hidden behind the heavy crimson curtain backstage. Lily. My Lily. A rustle beside me, a whispered comment. Mrs. Albright, Lily's fifth-grade teacher, leaned slightly towards her colleague, her voice a low, conspiratorial hum I was clearly not meant to overhear, yet positioned perfectly for me to catch every syllable. She's just not academic, too slow for this kind of thing, really. A lovely girl, but, well. The unfinished sentence hung there, heavy and suffocating, a familiar weight I'd carried for years. I'd heard variations of that sentiment since Lily was in first grade. Lily struggles to keep pace. Her processing speed is a concern. Perhaps a less demanding environment would be more suitable. They were always delivered with a sympathetic tilt of the head, a gentle pat on my arm, as if they were breaking news of a terminal illness instead of describing a child who saw the world through a different lens. A child who could spend hours weaving intricate tales with her mismatched Lego figures, narrating epics that would leave me breathless, yet struggled to fill in the bubbles on a standardized test. The stage manager, a hairy-looking man with a headset, peeked through the curtain, then gestured. A ripple of anticipation went through the audience. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was the annual Expressions Assembly, a chance for students to share talents beyond the purely academic. Most would play instruments, sing, or perform short skits. Lily was going to read a poem, her own poem. A small figure emerged from the wings. Lily. Her pale blue dress, the one she'd insisted on wearing, had a faint constellation of ink smudges near the hem of the sleeve, testament to late-night writing sessions I'd only glimpsed from her doorway. Her dark hair, usually a wild storm cloud, was pulled back with a silver clip I'd given her, a tiny beacon in the vastness of the stage. She walked slowly, deliberately, towards the microphone stand, which seemed to tower over her. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. I saw her eyes, wide and luminous in the stage lights, scan the darkened auditorium. They were searching, I knew for me. I wanted to stand up, to wave, to somehow beam all my love and reassurance across the chasm separating us, but I was frozen, anchored by a fear so profound it stole my breath. What if she faltered? What if they laughed? What if Mrs. Albright's whispered words proved true in the most public, painful way? My gaze flickered to Mrs. Albright. She was watching Lily with an expression that was more clinical than curious, a slight, almost imperceptible frown line etching itself between her brows. It was the same expression she'd worn during our last IEP meeting. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The memory surfaced, unbidden, as sharp and unwelcome as a shard of glass. The conference room had been chilly, despite the weak spring sunshine trying to push through the grimy window. The table was long, polished, and intimidating. On one side sat myself, a lone parent clutching a worn notebook filled with observations about Lily's vibrant imagination, her insightful questions about the world, her innate kindness. On the other side, the team, Mrs. Albright, the school psychologist Dr. Evans with his perpetually weary eyes, and the special education coordinator Mrs. Henderson, whose smile never quite reached her eyes. Lily's scores on the cognitive assessment, Dr. Evans had begun, shuffling papers, indicate significant challenges in verbal comprehension and processing speed. He'd used the word deficits several times, each one a small, sharp blow. Mrs. Albright had nodded in agreement. In class, she's often disengaged during direct instruction. She struggles to follow multi-step directions. Her reading fluency is well below grade level. She'd offered a small, placid smile. We're recommending continued support in the resource room, and perhaps we should explore a more tailored curriculum. One with more concrete, hands-on activities. Less abstract thinking. Less abstract thinking. For my daughter, who could lose herself for hours in the intricate world she built in her mind, whose stories were filled with metaphor and wonder. I remembered opening my mouth to speak, to tell them about the notebooks hidden under Lily's bed, filled with sprawling, misspelled epics about talking animals and faraway galaxies, about the puppet shows she staged for her stuffed animals, complete with complex plot twists. But she writes, I'd managed, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. She writes these incredible stories. She has such a rich inner world. Mrs. Henderson had given me that tight, professional smile. That's lovely, dear. Creative play is so important. But we're talking about academic benchmarks, measurable outcomes. The district requires us to focus on addressing the identified learning disabilities. Identified learning disabilities. Labels. Boxes. They had a language for everything that Lily wasn't, but no words for what she was. I'd felt a familiar wave of helplessness wash over me, the kind that left me feeling small and inadequate, a failed advocate for my own child. They were the experts, with their charts and their percentiles and their carefully modulated voices. I was just a mother, armed with nothing but love and a fierce, perhaps naive, belief in my daughter's potential. The meeting had ended with a new individualized education program, thicker than the last, filled with goals that felt reductive and strategies that seemed designed to sand down all of Lily's interesting edges. I'd signed the papers, my hand unsteady, feeling like I was complicit in their narrow definition of her. As we left, Mrs. Albright had patted Lily's shoulder, Lily, who had been sitting silently through the entire proceeding, picking at a loose thread on her jeans. Don't you worry, sweetie, Mrs. Albright had said, her voice gentle. We'll find a way to help you catch up. Catch up to whom? To what? The question had burned in my chest, unspoken. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On stage, Lily reached the microphone. It was adjusted too high. For a terrible moment, she just stood there, staring up at it, a small ship facing a tidal wave. My breath hitched. A few titters rippled through the younger students in the front rows. Mrs. Albright shifted beside me, a tiny, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her lips. Then, Mr. Henderson, the music teacher who was emceeing, bustled forward with a kind smile and quickly lowered the microphone to Lily's height. She gave him a small, grateful glance, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. He stepped back, and Lily was alone again, bathed in the stark white light. She took a deep, audible breath. I could see the slight tremor in her hands as she unfolded a piece of paper. It was covered in her neat, slightly too large handwriting, the same script that filled her story notebooks. I knew she'd memorized it, had recited it to the reflection in her bedroom mirror, to the silent audience of her stuffed animals, night after night. The paper was a talisman, a familiar weight in her unsteady grip. Her eyes found mine in the darkness. Just for a second. A flicker of connection. In that instant, I tried to pour every ounce of belief I had into my gaze. Asterisk, you can do this, my love. You are stronger than they know. Star. Her voice, when it came, was small at first, barely more than a whisper, amplified by the microphone into something fragile and tentative. My poem, she began, her voice wavering on the first syllable, is called The Whispering Seed. A cough from the audience. The rustle of a candy wrapper. My own heart thrumming like a trap drum. They told me I was a quiet seed, she read, her voice gaining a fraction more strength, too small to grow, too slow to bloom. I saw Mrs. Albright's head tilt, a professional curiosity now replacing the earlier skepticism. Other teachers, scattered throughout the auditorium, were starting to focus, their conversations dying down. They planted me in rows so neat, Lily continued, her rhythm starting to find its footing, with rules for sunshine and lines for feet. A memory surfaced, vivid and poignant. Lily in second grade, her face crumpled in frustration over a math worksheet. Rows and rows of problems she couldn't untangle. Later that evening, I'd found her in her room, a blanket draped over two chairs to form a makeshift cave. Inside, illuminated by a flashlight, she was drawing. Page after page of fantastical creatures, each with its own elaborate backstory, which she whispered to herself as she drew. Her lines weren't neat then. They were bold, expressive, full of life. The contrast had been stark, a silent testament to where her true engagement lay. I remembered the ache in my chest, the desire to shield her from a world that seemed determined to measure her only by her struggles. My roots, they said, were tangled things, not straight and strong, like other springs. Her voice was steadier now. The slight tremor was still there, but it was overlaid with a surprising resonance. She wasn't just reading, she was feeling the words. Each one seemed to carry a piece of her. The ink smudges on her dress sleeve suddenly felt like battle scars, proudly displayed. They measured rainfall, timed the light, and wondered why I shunned the bright. I thought of the countless assessments, the endless tracking of her progress against standardized charts. The way her creativity, her imaginative leaps, were often dismissed as daydreaming or not paying attention. They wanted her to grow in their meticulously defined garden, under their carefully controlled conditions, never understanding that some seeds need wilder soil, a different kind of nourishment. The auditorium was growing quieter. The rustling had ceased. Even the younger children seemed to be listening, captivated perhaps by the earnestness in her voice, the simple, powerful imagery. But in the dark, Lily's voice lifted, gaining a quiet power that sent shivers down my spine. Where shadows played, a different kind of strength was made. I remembered the nights I'd tiptoe past her room, long after she was supposed to be asleep. A sliver of light from under her door. The soft scratch of a pencil on paper. Sometimes, I'd hear her whispering, testing out phrases, sounding out words, her small brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't practicing for school, not for grades. She was practicing for herself, for the stories that lived inside her, demanding to be told. There was a fierce determination in those stolen hours, a resilience that the school reports never captured. My roots delved deep, through stubborn stone, to find a rhythm all my own. Her gaze lifted from the paper, sweeping across the audience, no longer searching, but connecting. There was a new confidence in her stance, a subtle shift in her presence. She was no longer just a nervous child on a big stage. She was a poet, sharing her truth. They couldn't see the world I wove, a tapestry of silent love, of whispered dreams in shades of night, of colors hidden from their sight. I risked a glance at Mrs. Albright. Her mouth was slightly agape. The clinical observation was gone, replaced by something akin to surprise, disbelief. Her hands, which had been resting primly in her lap, were now gripping the armrest of her chair. Several other teachers near her had leaned forward, their attention utterly fixed on Lily. The power in Lily's voice was not loudness, but clarity. It was the pure, unvarnished truth of her experience, delivered with a quiet conviction that was more compelling than any declamation. They said my voice was just a sigh, too faint to ever reach the sky. She paused, and in that pause, the silence in the auditorium was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the worn carpet. Every eye was on my daughter. But listen now, she said, her voice clear and ringing, imbued with a gentle authority that belied her years. Listen close. My whisper learned to fly. It was more than just the words. It was the way she delivered them, the quiet dignity in her bearing, the steady gaze that held no anger, only a profound sense of self-awareness. She was not accusing. She was revealing. For in the quiet, I grew tall. I learned to answer freedom's call. Not in their garden, straight and tame, but in the wild, I spoke my name. My eyes were burning. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Not yet. This was her moment, not mine. But oh, the pride that swelled in my chest was immense, a warm, fierce tide. She was doing it. She was showing them. Not with defiance, not with anger, but with the undeniable power of her own authentic voice. I thought of the day she'd come home, clutching the permission slip for the expressions assembly. Her eyes had been shining with a nervous excitement. I want to do it, Mama, she'd said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wrote a poem. I want to read it. My first instinct had been fear. Fear of her being hurt, of her being misunderstood, yet again. Are you sure, sweetie? I'd asked, trying to keep the apprehension out of my voice. It's a big audience. She'd nodded, her small chin set with a determination I recognized, the same determination that kept her writing in her notebooks late at night. I have to, she'd said simply. I'd offered to help her practice, to go over the lines, but she gently refused. I need to do it myself, Mama. And so I'd respected that, watching from the periphery as she painstakingly wrote and rewrote, rehearsed in the privacy of her room. I'd seen the crumpled balls of paper in her wastebasket, the evidence of her struggle and her perseverance. She hadn't wanted someone else to read it for her, hadn't wanted anyone to fix it. This was hers, wholly and completely. The poem was nearing its end. Lily's voice, which had started as a fragile thread, was now a silken cord, strong and true, weaving its way into the heart of the room. So let them measure, let them test. The seeds that grow within my chest are not for charts or neat display, but bloom in their own wondrous way. She looked directly towards the section where I knew many of her teachers were sitting. Her gaze wasn't defiant, but it was unwavering. It was the look of someone who understood her own worth, regardless of external validation. My mind's a forest, deep and wide, she concluded, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its power, where quiet wonders safely hide. And if you listen, you will hear a universe, alive and clear. She finished. The last word, clear, hung in the air, resonating in the profound stillness. For a moment, nothing happened. No one moved. It was as if the entire auditorium was holding its breath, processing what they had just witnessed. Lily stood there, her small shoulders squared, the paper still held loosely in her hands, her chest rising and falling with her slightly quickened breath. Then, from the back of the auditorium, a single clap, clear and distinct. It was followed by another, then another. And then, like a sudden shower after a long drought, the applause erupted. It wasn't polite, dutiful applause. It was thunderous. It was genuine. It rose and swelled, filling the vast space, washing over the stage, over Lily. Teachers were on their feet. Students were cheering, whistling. I saw Mrs. Albright, her face a mixture of astonishment and something else, respect. She was clapping, her earlier skepticism completely erased. Dr. Evans, a few rows ahead, was slowly nodding, a thoughtful expression on his face. Even Mrs. Henderson, usually so composed, looked visibly moved, her applause enthusiastic. Lily's eyes, wide and shining, scanned the audience again. This time, they were not searching with nervousness, but with a dawning understanding. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. It was a smile of relief, of quiet triumph, of a burden finally laid down. The applause went on and on. Mr. Henderson, the MC, stepped forward, beaming, but he wisely let the moment continue, let Lily absorb it. He put a gentle hand on her shoulder, and she looked up at him, her smile widening just a fraction. My own hands were stinging from clapping so hard. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, hot and cleansing. They weren't tears of sadness or fear anymore, but of overwhelming joy and profound relief. My little girl, the one they'd labeled and measured and found wanting, had just redefined intelligence for an entire school, not with arguments or statistics, but with the simple, undeniable power of her truth, beautifully expressed. Finally, as the applause began to subside, Lily gave a small, almost shy bow. She turned and walked off the stage, not with the hesitant steps of before, but with a newfound lightness, a quiet confidence in her bearing. The heavy crimson curtain swished closed behind her. The assembly continued. Other acts came and went, but for me, the world had shifted on its axis. The air in the auditorium no longer felt oppressive. It felt charged, alive with possibility. The creaky seat beneath me no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt like a front-row seat to a quiet revolution. When the assembly finally ended, I made my way through the throng of departing parents and students, my heart still soaring. I found Lily standing near the side exit, away from the main crush, clutching her poem. Her face was flushed, her eyes bright. She saw me, and her expression softened. She didn't rush towards me, didn't exclaim. She simply waited. I reached her and knelt, pulling her into a hug that felt like it held all the unspoken words of years. Her arms went around my neck, holding on tight. I could feel the faint, lingering scent of ink from her dress sleeve, a reminder of her quiet, steadfast work. We stayed like that for a long moment, the noise of the dispersing crowd fading into the background. There was nothing to say, not really. Everything that needed to be said had been spoken from that stage, in her voice, with her words. Finally, I drew back, cupping her face in my hands. Her eyes, those incredible, observant eyes, were shining. "You were wonderful, Lily," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Just wonderful." A small, genuine smile spread across her face. "Thanks, Mama." We walked out into the afternoon sunshine hand in hand. As we passed the main entrance, I saw Mrs. Albright talking to another parent. She caught my eye, and for a moment, our gazes held. She gave me a nod, a small, hesitant smile that was different from her usual professional one. It held a new awareness, perhaps even a touch of humility. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner of Lily's favorite pizza, she sat beside me on the sofa, not reading or writing, just resting, a quiet contentment about her. The ink-smudged dress lay discarded on her bedroom floor, a symbol of a battle fought, and, in its own quiet way, won. I thought back to the auditorium, to the hushed expectancy, to the power of her small voice filling that large space. They said she was too dumb for school, but now they know better. They had heard her speak, and in her words, they had glimpsed the universe she carried inside. And perhaps, just perhaps, they have begun to understand that there are more ways to be intelligent, more ways to bloom, than their charts could ever measure. The whispering seed had found its voice, and it was a voice that would not easily be silenced again.